all right, enough. Enough, you wore me down, all right?
What?
I said you wore me down, all right? Fine, I'll try your miniature painting.
I've never asked you to paint because you've shown the exact opposite of interest in painting.
Hey, no need to split hairs, man. You should just be grateful that by the end of the night, I'm gonna be painting some big old bazookas up in here.
I mean, if you're excited, let's do it.
All right, now we're cooking with turpentine. I'm just gonna get some of these paints right over here.
Nope. I got a better idea. Hey man, this isn't exactly what I had envisioned for the most flesh-tearing, armor-piercing, lead-raining, ball-munching, baby-punching, baddest mofos in the universe, man. Hey again, friends. You know, recently I was out on my usual hunt for cheap super glue and spray paint, and this time I was at Menards, a local big box home improvement and hardware store, common here in the Midwest United States. And I came across this. This box of 36 TESTORS CRAFT paints was priced at $25, and my curiosity got the best of me. Now, I've never actually tried craft paints on miniatures before, but we've all heard the horror stories of how terrible the coverage is, how weak the pigmentation is, and how shiny their finish is. But TESTORS is a brand that has some experience in model paints, and the bottles say they're a matte finish. So let's take them for a test drive and see how they perform. Vroom, vroom. And if you're going to go ahead and ruin a model with crappy craft paints, then it might as well be an amazing one. So today our test subject is going to be these boys, half-brothers, known as the Behemoths of Ruin by CreatureCaster. Oh, and ironically, CreatureCaster just happens to be today's sponsor. If you haven't heard of CreatureCaster, today is going to be a treat. I have never shied away from my love of the demons, dragons, and beasts that are made by these crazed Canadians. I've painted a couple of their larger models, as I'll show you right here, and I have to attest to the fact that they are as fun to paint as they are to look at. And I'm super excited that they started to make more smaller models in the 32mm size, like the Atriarchs of Ruin, one of which I'm painting today. CreatureCaster is also entering the gaming side of our hobby with the upcoming Kickstarter Judgment Eternal Champions. The intense 3v3 skirmish game raises the bar on what we expect from not only strategic competitive board gaming, but also the quality of the miniatures in these games. Oh, and if you click in the link below, you can get signed up for notification when their Kickstarter goes live. And just by signing up with my link down there, you get in the drawing for a free starter box of Judgment once it comes out. Who doesn't want free minis? You want free minis? You want free minis? Free minis in the back? Free minis? Yeah, I thought so. A big thank you to CreatureCaster for making sure that my backlog never dries out by buying so many of their awesome models. Oh, and I guess thank you for sponsoring this video as well. Anyway, back to the paint job. I can immediately tell that this paint isn't meant for miniatures straight out of the bottle. The medium is very thick and very goopy, almost like a sticky substance. My guess is that it's formulated this way so it can adhere to a wide variety of crafting surfaces, from a very porous wood grain all the way up to a very smooth and shiny metal. So I'm immediately nervous, but I decide to continue anyway, and I put a bunch of paints on my palette that I'm going to mix together for my own sickly skin tone. And with a little bit of water, something really interesting happens. They actually form a really nice painting consistency, almost like a layer paint that we're used to in miniature painting. So I have a little bit of hope here that this might actually work. I often like to mix up a base tone and a darker version of that base tone and use my Zenithal Prime as a guide to block in areas that will be in shadow, as well as the standard base tone. By starting out with this step, I've created an important building block for contrast, dramatic use of light. I expected that since I had to dilute this paint down so much so it was usable, that the actual coverage for the layer consistency would be terrible, and it actually wasn't. It's not too far off from most of the miniature paints we use on a regular basis. It took about 2 to 3 coats to get the base layers on. Now, just because this stuff can make a decent base layer doesn't mean it's won me over and it's great by any stretch of the imagination. Typically, our base colors are a mid-tone or darker, and those tend to have better pigmentation. As I build up the highlights on the skin, I'm adding a little bit more ivory and a little bit more yellow. I really want to push this color further and brighter than maybe even I'm comfortable with. When thinned down, most bright paints lose their opacity pretty quickly, and this stuff does the same thing, which is fine when we're trying to work in a thin layer consistency anyway. I don't want it super thick or super vibrant. I build it up over layers. But what this paint doesn't do is it doesn't separate and it doesn't get grainy when I thin it down and add more bright tones. As I continue to build up highlights on the skin, I notice that I'm losing a bit of color interest. The skin is getting a bit too boring for me, and I guess that's okay. I mean, to me, it's more important to push the colors brighter and farther, because it's quite easy for us to bring in more color and interest later over these light tones. So let's do just that. Let's add some color interest back into this skin. And the first color I'm going to use is a sickly yellow-green, almost a putrid color. I want this skin to feel like it's not quite right. It's a little bit off. But I still want it to feel close enough to human skin to make you a little bit uneasy about this monster. So I thin this green down to a very thin glaze. And here is where I expected the craft choo-choo train to go riding off the rails and stumble over a cliff into the ocean and get gobbled up by a kraken. Low quality paints do not hold up to thinning this much. By putting down to a glaze consistency, they just break. We've broken apart the pigments in the medium too far at this point, and they get grainy and they get splotchy. But not this paint. This paint creates glazes just as well as any miniature paint I've ever used. In fact, I wouldn't know the difference between this or one of my others on the wall. In fact, in some cases, it's quite a bit better. And when I went back in with this dark plum color, which is almost like a maroon burgundy color, I just loved it. I can see myself using this as a glaze into shadows for skin and adding all sorts of interesting warm shadow tones in a variety of surfaces. Yellow's a color that's notorious for being finicky, so I wanted to add one more glaze of this bright warm yellow into all the boils and these weird looking faces that are trying to pop out of the skin of this shoulder. It's pretty sweet. And the yellow worked just like I wanted it to. It gave me a nice faint yellow tone that I could build up with multiple coats if I wanted to and keep it faint where I wanted the brightest highlights. I moved along to many of the other details on the model, like his loincloth, with the same basic approach. 2 different base tones placed based on how much light the surface would receive, and then build up the highlights based on the material the surface is made out of. I keep the highlights more scratchy and haphazard for all this cloth and leather bits, as it feels a bit more rough and in tone for what those surfaces are. But not everything was sunshine and rainbows with this paint. I struggled when I tried to get a nice vibrant coat build up to another brighter color. Like this purple tongue, I wanted to have a nice bright pink highlight to it, and it just kind of got muddy. I'm guessing that's probably because the colors mixed and the amount of pigment in those colors is a little bit lacking overall in the paint, and that just showed as I tried to keep it vibrant. It just fought me the whole time. When I was looking through the colors of this set, there was two that I really was excited about, and they were this red rust and terracotta. I think they'll be great foundations for building cool rust all over the metals on this project. So I started with the red rust and I added a bit of black and used that as my base tone over all the metals. One fun way that I've found that's really easy to make a cool looking rust is to thin down your rusty color to a pretty thick glaze consistency and just dot it all over the surface of the model. This will give you a splotchy look, a more realistic look to how rust gets created over time. I then go back with a thinned black and do the same thing, focusing a little bit more on the areas that would be darker before coming back to the red rust again. And you can do this to create as much depth of color as you like. For me, the final step was I took this terracotta color and I just made this be my brightest rust, and I made sure I hit some edges and some interesting spots along the blades. Now we really need to bring these blades to life, and to do that I'm going to mix a gradient from a dark gray all the way up to a very bright gray, mixed in with a little bit of blue to give it a cool feel as well. Any blade, no matter how rusty, if used to repeatedly hack at your victims, will retain a nice sharp edge. And so we're going to do that by creating a very simple non-metallic blade edge. This is a great way, if you're not comfortable with non-metallic metals or you haven't really tried it yet, to give it a go. It's pretty simplistic. We're just going to create lines perpendicular to the edge of the blade, all up and down. And we want to make sure that it stays irregular and it doesn't look too much like a pattern. And we're just going to build up brighter and brighter until we get to almost that pure white for the shiniest parts of that blade edge. One of my favorite things to paint when doing miniatures are these tiny little scratches of light. It almost like it brings the blade to life for the first time.
I'm a real sword.
Metals tend to reflect the light in their environment, and to really bring your metals to life, you can do that really easily. Just glaze in a color that you would expect the light to be. I just take a little bit of a warm yellow and glaze that over top of the highlights that I put on the blade edge. I paint the eyes of our Smash Bros a bright yellow, and then I glaze in some thinned down red in and around the sockets. Let's bring that red, deep nastiness back into the eyes. It helps us draw our eyes to the model's eyes. Eyes on eyes. And then I come back in with a bright yellow dot of light right on that eye. When I was fiddling around with adding more shadows and highlights to the base, it dawned on me that I hadn't even noticed how matte this paint was. I was expecting it to be shiny and off-putting, but I guess that once I started painting with it, I just thought of it as miniature paint on my palette, and I didn't even notice that it was extremely matte. How nice. Back to the base. When I got the highlights and shadows put in, just sketching them out, I thinned down a forest green color quite a bit, and I made a lot of it, make a wash. And I just slathered that over the entire base. And because I built up highlights and built down shadows underneath that wash, it created this nice, interesting, muddy green tone for the whole base. My final step for the base is to take this sickly green Nurgly color. Am I allowed to say that? Can I say Nurgle? And I put that in spots near the cracks and crevices and shadows of the rocks on the base. And then I quickly take a clean, damp brush and feather that out to create a fade where this weird green glow seems to be coming from somewhere in the environment. And I kind of dug how awesome this base looked with like 3 very quick and easy steps. And it's something that I think that I might use for an army in some variation in the future. I guess I didn't really think about this project as a product review video. I wasn't really thinking at all. It was just fun to test out and find what worked and what didn't. To me, the biggest takeaway was that I had to discover what the paint did well and lean into that instead of fighting what it didn't do well. All paints, all ranges, and even specific colors in those ranges have strengths and weaknesses, just like this paint. So John, should you go out and spend all your money on craft paint and throw all your miniature paints away? Well, no, of course not. I mean, if you can come across this paint set, I would say it's pretty darn worth the money, and it's a great investment, especially if you're new and you're willing to put in a little time with it. But remember, no matter what painting tool you use, whether it's paints, brushes, whatever, it is just that. It's a tool. It has limitations, it has strengths, but you need to understand those and realize that there is no magic bullet out there that's going to make up for the fact that you need to put in time at the painting table. If you like this video and you want to support me in creating more, there's a number of ways you can do it. I'd love it if you join me over on the Patreon, where you've got a lot of fun over on the Discord server, talking about everything from minis to products to painting critiques of each other's work to breakfast cereals and fruit bats, as well as I have a weekly vlog that I put out as well. You could also pick up some sweet Ninja merch down in the link below, as well as use any of my Amazon affiliate links where you can purchase stuff that you already were going to for the hobby or anything else at no additional cost to you. Now, get out of my basement. I got to get back to slay the gray. And I think you probably should too.
What do you say, little pony? You want to go bring down the death of 1,000 gods upon these sorry sons of bitches? What color purple would you say that is? Alright, we're just going to color match the mane here. Pretty close. Alright, yeah, man, we'll paint you later. Let's get this pony up ready to rock. Oh no, Fluttershy! I mean, there's so many Legos in here, I could make the biggest, sweetest fortress. No one could ever get into it. Ever. Hey, man, there's a Lego village over there. Fix bayonets.